Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Evans, and I'm the Managing Director of the Community Living Ontario Foundation. And I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on how to attract and retain the best board of directors. We'd like to extend our thanks to our presenter today, Kelly McKinney from McDougall Insurance and Financial, a strategic partner with Community Living Ontario in the commercial and directors insurance category. Kelly and McDougall Insurance are longtime supporters of our organization and our work, and many of you may have met Kelly at our conference in previous years or saw him in the video with Buster the dog at our virtual conference this past year. McDougall Insurance, along with Frank Cowan Insurance, also provided a very generous corporate donation this past year as well to support our work. We look forward to our continued partnership and this presentation today. But just before we start, a few housekeeping items. All attendee microphones are muted, but we encourage people to ask questions to the panel and we'll leave time at the end for questions. The webinar will be recorded and made available shortly to all those who registered after we finish up. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to Kelly to kick things off.
Great, thank you very much, Heather. Hello, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. The fact that you're here today means you're working on continuing education on your field and how to attract and retain the best board of directors. So thank you for attending. I think it's great. And I'm going to talk for 20 minutes. This is a quick presentation, and then allow about 5 minutes at the end for questions. So as Heather said, if you have them throughout the presentation, I think with this the best way to do it is put in the chat, and then I'll answer at the end. And Ron and Heather are going to help me address the questions. Unless there's one sort of that's in the middle of the flow, feel free to interrupt Heather if there's one that makes sense in the middle. We discussed that in our little practice run. So how to attract and retain the best board of directors. Here we go. So there's 3 items in our agenda. What you need to know before volunteering for a board. And the way the presentation is structured, this works for you as an individual if you're thinking about volunteering somewhere else. It also works as an organization if you're thinking about attracting the very best people you can and retaining them. So depending on which hat you're wearing, feel free to sort of move back and forth, and all the information I share is meant to work both ways. So that's the first one. What information should you share as an organization with potential board of directors candidate, and how do you effectively screen candidates? So there's the 3 items. Quickly, I'll just do an introduction myself. Heather did a nice one to start. That's me from the conference last year with Buster, a borrowed dog. It's not my dog, but I thought it'd be more entertaining if I had a dog in my picture than just old me. And I wore the same jacket as last year, just so you know who I am. And maybe you're thinking, this guy just has one jacket, but that's me. I have worked for 16 years in the insurance field. I insure Community Living Ontario. I insure several local community living organizations, and shortly I will be volunteering on the board of directors for Community Living Prince Edward, which I'm very excited about. A little bit about McDougall Insurance. We have 38 little offices all over Ontario, mostly in Eastern Ontario, but also the North. And it's our 75th anniversary this year, and we're all about local. So our idea is we like it when people can call us and say, hey, Kelly, I've got a problem, or hey, Bill, or whoever it is in the office they deal with. So it's not a call center. When people call, they don't give a policy number and say, hey, you know, start at the beginning. They know who they're dealing with, and that's sort of what we offer that makes us different. But it's, from my perspective, it's nice to deal with people that you know. So I know all of my customers, and when someone calls, you know, I know a little bit about them, I know a little bit of their background, I know the organization, I know what they do, and that's just our thing. So there's lots of ways to obtain insurance, but that's what we do. And then I give a quick outline of the presentation. We asked some polling questions beforehand, and it's just for fun to get a sense of, you know, who everyone is and what your backgrounds are. And we're going to share the results of this. I'm sure you've seen this before on the webinars. So polling questions: do you volunteer for any boards? So the group that's attending, and I believe there's 120 people, which is very exciting. I actually got nervous this morning. 68% yes, they volunteer for a board. 32% said no. The next question: have you asked to see a copy of their insurance that protects you? So 45% yes, 35% no, and 20% didn't apply because they don't volunteer. An interesting thing is, if a lot of people ask to see the insurance, you know, you get a copy of something that is really hard to read, and it's almost written in another language. And it takes, you know, a professional that's seen a lot of it to understand. And even, you know, I get questions all the time. I have questions myself. where I'll go to an insurance company and say, hey, what exactly do you mean by this? Because this is confusing. It's not clear to me what you're saying and what you're covering. So I'd say even further for organizations that, you're listening, I would invite your insurance broker, whoever it is, to come in and present to the board and give the opportunity to people to ask questions. So I did a presentation on Saturday morning for the board of Community Living Ontario, and it's a great, I love it because I think, okay, these people are serious about risk management. They want to know what's in their policy. They want to know what they're protected for and what they're not protected against. And so to me, it's a sign of an organization that's interested in risk management. They care about what's going on. So don't be afraid you're going to offend your broker by asking them to present. And I think, everyone gets educated. So there's often presentations where I learn something too about the organization, about the way they think, about the way they operate. So I think it's a good idea to invite your insurance broker in to present to you. So 3 questions. The first one is, what do you need to know before volunteering for a board? So this is an individual that's volunteering, but it also could be, what information do you want to share with people as a board? And so I've got 2 slides here, a couple questions. So basically I'd say, what do you need to know to volunteer? A lot. You want to know everything about the organization that you can, including things that, maybe aren't on the website or aren't in a colorful brochure. Ask some tough questions to find out, how things work. So for example, ask questions about the organization's programs. Do you understand what they do? And what I'll do, just to follow up this presentation, is I'll send these to Heather, so don't feel you have to write them down because each one has several items under each line. So what is the organization's mission? How do its current programs relate to that mission? Can I visit the organization and observe a program firsthand? Does the organization have a strategic plan that is reviewed and evaluated on a regular basis? That's important stuff. I want to know that if I'm going to volunteer for a board. Are they thinking about the future and the changes? The world's changing so fast. Are they maybe not prepared for it, but at least asking themselves tough questions about what's going to come? Ask questions about the organization's financial status. So this is a good one. Is the financial condition of the organization sound? Does the board discuss and approve the annual budget? How often do board members receive financial reports? Finance, I'm a business person. Finance is everything. So whether it's a for-profit business or not for-profit, you want to know those questions. So do they take finance seriously? And that's important because your responsibilities as a member of the board, you're on the hook for some things that I'll get to later. So this is important stuff. Ask questions about the organization's clients or constituencies. So if we're just talking about community living, you know exactly what that is, but whom does the organization serve, or are the organization's clients or constituencies satisfied with the organization? So that's a big question that if you pose that to the executive director or board, they might have to think, well, yeah, we think we do a good job for the most part. Okay, what issues have you had in the past year where, you weren't doing such a good job? I want to know that before I volunteer for a board. Next slide, 3 more questions. Ask questions about the structure of the board. How is it structured? Are there descriptions and responsibilities for each board member? Who are the other board members? Is there a system of checks and balances to prevent conflicts of interest between board members and the organization? These are all really important questions. The next one, does the organization have directors and officers liability coverage? So often, when I'm calling people to ask about their insurance or give them advice, I'll say, do you have an insurance policy? Do you have a directors and officers insurance policy, or DNO for short? And they say, yes, we have one. And then you ask further, what's the limit? What's the coverage? Does it extend to volunteers? All these questions, often people don't know. So one thing, do you have a policy? But 2, do you understand what's in it? And if you don't, that's where you invite the broker to come and do a presentation. So ask questions about individual board members' responsibilities. So what are the ways you think you contribute to a board? How much of my time will be required, and what are the special events? How are committee assignments made? What orientation do I receive? And so this is a really good point. The more serious you are when you're recruiting people, the better people you're going to get. Because if they're asking tough questions, they're the kind of people you want on a board. I know it's hard to get volunteers right now, so it's challenging to be, you don't want to be too difficult. But I think the more information you provide, the more questions I ask, the better a candidate you're going to get, and the less surprises you'll have down the road. So ask questions about the board's relationship to the staff. Is the board satisfied with the performance of the executive staff? How do board members and senior staff typically work with each other? So there's a bunch of questions. I will follow up because there's a lot of information there, but all good stuff. So another polling question. Are your board members personally responsible for the decisions of the board? So I put your board members there, but basically just in general, is any board member personally responsible for their decisions? So here are the answers. 47% say yes, 26% say no, and 27 didn't apply to. So here's the answer. You are responsible as a director 100%. Now, there's mechanisms to protect you. So number one mechanism, you're protected by the ONCA, which is the Not-for-Profit Corporations Act 2010. So there are elements there that protect you, and I'll get into a little bit of detail. You can also get indemnity from the organization. So the organization can agree to indemnify the director by paying for defense costs and whatnot. And the third one is directors and officers insurance. So are you responsible? Yes. Are you covered under a D&O policy? Yes, depending on what you did and what the allegation is. So I'm going to get into a bit of detail about that. So the Not-for-Profit Corporations Act 2010 lays out what your responsibilities are as a director. So this is good for you as a volunteer. If you're thinking about going out and volunteering, also good for the organization. I'm sure a lot of people know this already, and I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence, but let's start at the beginning always. So the two big responsibilities of a director: act honestly and in good faith to serve the best interests of the corporation or the organization. And number two, exercise the care, diligence, and skill that a reasonably careful person would exercise in similar circumstances. So a directors and officers policy covers you for your acts or omissions where you don't do something, as long as you're acting in the scope of your job. So the example I gave on Saturday, if you have a volunteer on the board of directors and they do open heart surgery at one of your locations, you're not going to be covered for that. That's not in the scope of their duty as a board of directors. And one of the things you can help lay out so there's no confusion when something bad happens is to make sure the board of directors each have a job description. But here's your job, you're on the board, you're the treasurer, here's what we expect of you, and here's what we will deliver to you so you can do that job. Just checking the time there. Okay, so requirements to be a director. This is also from the Non-for-Profits Act. Now, this might be completely obvious, but here's the requirements to be a director in Ontario. Now, this is the guideline for it. So the Ontario government provides this guideline for everyone. You may have bylaws for your organization that go above and beyond this and lay more criteria, and but this is just a background. So it has to be an individual. It can't be a corporation that is on the board. I can have a numbered company with 3 or 4 people. It has to be one individual, 18 years of age or older. A person who has not been found incapable by any court in Canada or elsewhere. This is a curious one, but if you've been found guilty of something, the court may say you cannot volunteer for board of directors, and you can't be bankrupt. So those are the guidelines. What information should you share? So we had 3 questions on our agenda. We're now to number 2. What information should you share with the potential for your board of directors? I think, I sort of made the point earlier, everything basically, but here's some real guidelines. And again, I'll send this out. Everyone get a copy of the presentation so you know exactly what's in there. Your articles of incorporation, they're relevant. Your bylaws, super important. Everybody that joins the board should get a copy of the bylaws. They should read them. You should have a little, package of information that says, hey, please sign here that you've read the bylaws and accept them and understand them. Financial statements, everything you have that you can give them. If you do audited financial statements, they should have those. If you have, review or a different status for those, provide those. Potential conflicts of interest. If you're inviting people onto the board, for example, I mentioned I'm going to join the board of Prince Edward County. I'm an insurance broker and I also insure Prince Edward County. So, I've got to be very careful about, what my potential conflicts of interest are. And I will state them at the very beginning. And if there's any discussion at all about insurance, I'll have to excuse myself from that meeting and not be part of the voting. And, if you have a good board with a broad background, sometimes you pick on, you're going to talk to your accountants or lawyers or wherever to get volunteers. You got to make sure you lay out those conflicts of interest. If you have someone in real estate that helps you out with some transactions, they also help on the board. You got to be really careful. They have to be careful. You have to be careful about laying out what the potential conflicts of interest are. Indemnification is how you protect members of the board. That should be laid out typically in the bylaws. And then liability insurance. Show them your liability insurance. You know, chances are, as I mentioned before, they'll have questions about, okay, what does this really mean? And then the last one is really important, and that's your expectations. So how often do you meet? When do you meet? What constitutes a quorum? You know, what are you expecting of people in terms of their time commitment, and also their, you know, their investment into the organization? What do you need from them? So, click back on here. Polling questions. If you missed a meeting, are you still responsible for the decisions of the board? I love this question. So, yes, 55%, 10% no, 35% not applicable. And that not applicable number keeps changing, which is curious to me because it's, anyway. So, you know, are you responsible for decisions of the board? Absolutely you are. So this is a tough one because you could say, hey, I'm not at the board meeting. Why am I responsible for the decisions? I wasn't part of it. The board of directors is like a team. So if you play team sports somewhere in your life, you might not agree with the decisions of the coach or the captain, but once that decision's made, you go along with it. And that's part of the board that you should lay out for the board is you're not going to agree with everything here, but once we make a vote and we have a majority of people agree with it, we're all together and we're moving forward. If you don't agree with it in such a strong fashion that you think you can't continue anymore on the board, then you resign. There's a mechanism for that. But if you miss a meeting, you're responsible. So what I'd recommend, and this is depending on what side of the fence you're on, if you're the organization, make sure there's a mechanism for voting by proxy. Make sure you send information well enough in advance of the meeting that people can read it and understand it, ask questions, and vote by proxy. So it happens all the time. People take holidays. They're not going to be able to make a meeting, and maybe they're going to miss the time frame where you send out the information. As a volunteer and the other side for the organization, that person's responsible for the decision. So ideally, they get the information, they vote by proxy, they understand the implications of the decision afterwards, and they're checking in as soon as they get back from holiday to say, okay, where do we end up on this? I was sorry to miss the meeting. I read about it, I voted, what's the final decision? Because now, as a volunteer on the board of directors, that team, I'm part of that decision. So that's a huge one. So your responsibilities, and I want to point out, who would ever sue a nonprofit board and why? It's a curious thing, but we see claims, we've got, I mentioned, 38, 39 offices. I don't know the number of clients. We have over 100,000 different clients. So we see claims a lot. There's two main claims from a board of directors. One is an allegation the treasurer did something wrong, and that led to either a bankruptcy or just a mismanagement of funds. The other big claim we see is wrongful dismissal. So the executive director typically is let go and they disagree with the way that was handled. It's very specific in Canadian Ontario law about how you have to pay someone based on the number of years they were with you. And if you go offside of that, the insurance company is not going to pay what the legal statute lays out, but it will pay your defense costs if there's a disagreement about what happened. So some details. But so who would sue a nonprofit? I can't imagine. It's a nonprofit. It's a good organization. They're doing good work. Who would sue them? Employees, donors, government entities, volunteers, stakeholders, benefactors, creditors. They all would, and they do. So employees, what are some examples? Unlawful dismissal, also discrimination in the workplace. We see a lot of human rights tribunal claims right now. Directors and officers' policies, as an aside, are not all alike. Some cover them and some don't, so it's worthwhile asking those questions of your broker. Potential employees can also sue for failure to get employment. They have 2 interviews, they think it went well, they don't get the job, and they think that there's some discrimination for some reason that they didn't get the job. Donors and government entities for mismanagement of funds. Volunteers can say it's an unsafe workplace, there's discrimination. Stakeholders suffering a financial loss as a result of the actions or inactions of the board. Benefactors can say that the organization misused a bequeathed fund, and creditors in the event of an insolvency. So these are all groups that do, unfortunately, sue boards. So how do you effectively screen to get great candidates? And I'd say, you know, all the information before about what you share with them, you know, making sure they're asking a lot of questions of you. You don't want someone that just says, yeah, I'd love to volunteer, that'd be great, and you know, where do I sign? You want to make sure that they're asking a lot of questions, but do the candidates meet your goals? You know, do you have a diverse board? Do you have some professionals on there, and accountants, lawyers, someone that specializes in governance, business backgrounds, understand policies and procedures, and someone that's passionate about your mission? So I just want to go into a bit of detail for this. I'm going to check my time there. I think I'm doing okay, but okay, good. I find, so this is 16 years of insurance work with boards and nonprofits. There's typically no shortage of people who are very passionate about the organization and its goals. Sometimes boards, I find, have trouble finding business-minded people that can help with the other hard skills. And so I think it's great to have an accountant, not necessarily to have, you know, someone looking at the numbers, but they think in a very structured way. It's a good background to have for the board. It's good to have that background. Lawyers the same way. I wouldn't fill a board with lawyers if it was me, but lawyers are used to reading, you know, very detailed contracts. Their brains think differently than sometimes the, you know, just real passionate people. And not that lawyers are passionate, but it's good to have a broad and diverse background for people. So, you know, when I see a board that's got an accountant, that's got a lawyer, that's got a human resource person, I think good. They're in good shape. You know, someone's asking tough questions about systems and policies and procedures. So, polling question. If the organization goes bankrupt, are the board members still protected? Not sure why I put the still in there in that question, but are the board members protected? 59% yes, 7% no, and non-applicable 34%. So the answer is yes. Board members are protected by a director's and officer's insurance. It will pay out even though the organization is bankrupt. And you may get indemnification from the organization, but if they're bankrupt, they may not be able to pay your defense costs. But the directors and officers policy, and they're not all exactly alike, so you need to make sure there's the coverage is there. But in general, that's the intention. A board of directors, a directors and officers policy is designed to help you attract and retain the best people possible. So there's the answer to my question, my poll. Directors can be held responsible for unpaid wages and vacation pay. Those are two things as part of the Not-for-Profit Act. So I had little bonuses. My last slide, you know, where to find volunteers. So the question at the beginning was, you know, how do you attract and retain? Well, maybe you're thinking, okay, I just want to know, where do I find these people? You know, accounting firms and law firms all have accountants and lawyers coming up through the ranks. They're starting out, they've done their schooling, they're super smart, they got the background, but they're, you know, they want to help out. And so I'm sure you see them do, you know, they're doing audits, some of the newer recruits, but they're great ones to get because they want to help out. They're young, they're fresh, they have all the background, but they need some experience. And what a great way to get experience by volunteering for your organization. Insurance brokerage, you know, ask your insurance people. Any supplier to your organization, whatever they do, if there's a relationship where, you know, they understand what you do and they seem to get it, you know, where they're either passionate, which is great, but at least they go, yeah, I know what you guys do and I get it, and it's a good thing and I'd like to help out. Small business organizations, there's my little alarm to stop talking. And volunteer organizations, that's an obvious one, I guess, but in Belleville, I'm just thinking there's an organization called Volunteer and Information Quinte, and what they do all day, every day is find volunteers for organizations. And, you know, if you contact someone like that and say, hey, you know, here's what we're looking for a background, we have a need, you know, specifically for X or Y, you know, we need an accountant, we need a lawyer, we need just a general person, maybe someone with a background in HR that knows policies and procedures. You know, that organization, I know in Belleville, does a lot to help find those people. So I believe that's the end of my presentation. Yes, it is. And I'll turn it over to Heather and Ron to direct some questions.
All right, Kelly, thank you. Excellent presentation, and it certainly was rapid fire. So I'm sure people want to know, are they going to be receiving the recording and the slides? And they will. So I'll say that right up front. But thank you. That was really informative. I think we had one question here in the chat. So I thought ONCA had not yet been proclaimed into law, although passed. So that's a question someone's put forward.
Very good question. So I forget even what year it was now. I mean, ONCA's been delayed and delayed and delayed. So I actually don't know the exact answer to this, and I apologize. I will find out. So here's my promise to customers. So I don't know the answer to everything, but I will find out an answer and come back to you. So maybe when I send out the presentation to Heather, I'll get an answer on that. It's been delayed so many times, I've lost track of it. We did presentations in person back when we could do that for people to prepare for ONCA, and you know, it was delayed and delayed. So I'm a little embarrassed that I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out. At the time, the best advice we had from lawyers was, you know, this is going to happen. This is what the government wants. Here's how it's laid out. Here's how they're going to do it. Let's start operating as if it's in effect to protect ourselves in the best possible way. So that's my defense for not knowing the answer, but I will find out the answer and send it to everybody.
Okay, thank you. That's great. And then I think, oh, I have one more here. How do you deal with EDs who just want friends on their board? I experienced that and had to leave. So that's a question.
That's a very good question. You know, I'm not sure I know the answer to it. I guess to challenge them and say, hey, this is not a perfect phrase, but another organization I worked at, we joked about it, but we said, you know, if you have two people that think alike, get rid of one of them. So, you know, an organization, any board of directors, any group should have diverse opinions and where people disagree with each other in a friendly way, but it makes the organization better. So I'd say, you know, to that ED, you're not doing a service to the organization by having your friends on the board. You need people that are going to disagree with you once in a while, because I think it makes us all better. So sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes, you know, you get angry, but it's a healthy situation where you have different opinions, and then you come out at the end of it stronger. So I would say challenge that ED, you know, push them. Sounds like you've left the board already, but that would be my answer.
And then someone's asking, is there a minimum maximum number of board members, especially if your organization is small?
Good question. In the ONCA, which may or may not have been approved completely, there is guidelines, and I'd have to look them up to get the exact answer, but I will do that, and I'll send it out to you because I'm sure everybody would like to know. So I will get a number of board members.
Okay, great.
I did see it again in my research, but I don't remember the number exactly.
Sometimes I think it's outlined in your articles, and you have some flexibility, but you're right. I too remember visiting that, but I don't remember the exact, if there was direction on the exact numbers. So that's great. If you can get the answer, we'd appreciate it. Do directors have to be members of the organization? Oh, right, because we were member-based often.
Good question. So according to ONCA, they do not. A director doesn't have to be a member of the organization, but you may supersede that with your own bylaws. So you might say, thanks for the guidance, ONCA, but we feel it's important for our board members to be members of the organization.
Okay. How can someone become a board member if an association only wants advocates to sit and listen and say what they're doing and not be able to vote?
Yeah, I think it's similar to the other question about, you know, the ED having friends in the organization. So, you know, again, I'd say, you know, challenge the organization to have a diverse background, outspoken opinions, different, you know, resources to make the organization better. So it's, you know, there's two questions on that. So I guess I didn't realize it was such a challenge. What I hear more is, you know, geez, we need members for the board. Do you know where we can find them? Not where EDs are padding the board, but I guess it's, you know, it makes sense that it's a reality. People, I think in the corporate world and you know, the nonprofit world, both, you know, they like their opinions and they want someone to reinforce them. So it's probably a natural human condition that we want people to agree with us and move our agenda forward. And I'd say we all have to look in the mirror and go, yeah, is that the best thing for the organization? No.
Right. Okay, so more questions are coming in, Kelly. Can I keep going for a few minutes?
Sure. Yeah, you bet.
If you're building a not-for-profit, is there a conflict for board members to move from board positions to roles in the organization?
Good question. You know, I think in some ways it's perfect because they volunteered. So they said they wanted to be part of the organization and help out. And then maybe there's a role that you found for them in the organization where it's a paid job. I would just make sure that you're, you know, posting the jobs and going through all the process to make sure that, you know, it may not be an appointment, you know, the director's friends or appointment where you've done it because they're on the board. But I think what's important these days more than ever is that, you know, you've done the right thing. You've gone through the correct steps, because what you don't want is an allegation of, you know, favoritism, because then you get in trouble. So I would say it's not a bad thing, but make sure you go through all the right steps on how you do it.
Excellent. This may be another Anka question, but let's see. Is there guidance on numbers of committees and number of board meetings a year?
Good question. I don't remember seeing committees or number of board meetings, but I will double check. I'm going to become a whiz.
Yeah, me neither. I don't remember that either. Okay, in an application, do you directly ask if they have been bankrupt? Well, I know I can answer we do in our application for the foundation, and I believe for CLO's board membership as well.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea. And I think, you know, it's maybe unfair in some ways, you know, like it could happen to anyone, but I think you want to know that information.
Could Kelly speak generally about the composition of a well-designed board? That is, how to decide how many and what kind of people or what skills to recruit. Okay, that's a big question for the last question. But what do you think?
Well, I think, you know, in the perfect world, you know, you're going to have some people that understand exactly what the organization does. So some real, you know, hands-on. They don't have to be, you know, working the organization, but understand enough about what the, you know, the real work of the organization is. Because I don't think you don't want too many people who are, I don't want to say dreamers, but too many people that have fantastic ideas that don't really relate to the, you know, how work actually gets done in an organization, like how you support people really, you know, during COVID. So, so you want a few people that understand, you know, the actual work of the organization. But then I would say it would be great to have some professionals. So if there's a board of 8 to 10, say, depending on the size of your organization, you'd want, you know, I'd like to see 2 or 3 professionals. And it doesn't really matter, you know, if you need an accountant background for the treasurer, that makes sense to me. But you could also have an accountant that's a general figure. You could have a lawyer that's a general background. HR is a great asset to have if you can find someone with a background. There's a lot of you know, a lot of great people who have decided to retire but are still active. You know, they want to be active in the community. Their brains are active. They want to stay active. You know, if you can find sort of an HR person, that's fantastic. I'm just running through all the categories in my head. You know, I wouldn't say you need to have you know, an insurance broker on the board. I think you can get that advice separately. But, you know, finance is the most important. So I guess I would focus on that if I had to, you know, had to choose one profession, someone with an accounting or finance background to make sure you have that member on the board, because there's the perfect world, but then there's reality of, okay, you know, we're having a hard time getting people, or having a hard time getting not the ED's friends. Where should we focus? I'd start with finance.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you for today. That's the end of the questions, but it's been a great session and lots of engagement. So thank you, Kelly. Thanks to everyone for participating, and stay tuned for the recording and the presentation shortly. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.